One of the candidates muttered, "Lost bitch," under his breath, as Petty Officer 2nd Class Mara Kestrel walked past the formation at the Naval Special Warfare Training Compound in Coronado. All they noticed was a small, lean woman in a crisp Type 3 Navy uniform, the faint edges of a tattoo peeking out from beneath her left sleeve, a string of coordinates no one bothered to pay attention to. What none of them recognized was the 6-year gap buried inside her personnel file, sealed under OPEC-level clearance. And they had no clue that 2 direct action missions in East Africa still listed her under a lone operator tag that survived even the scrubbed after-action reports, RS-06. Senior Chief Rowan Hale had stiffened the moment he cross-checked her orders against the restricted roster. But by the time he connected the dots, the candidates had already crossed a line, and in Mara's world, lines weren't crossed without consequences. Who exactly had they just mouthed off to? A thick blanket of fog rolled over the Naval Special Warfare Center, turning the obstacle course into a ghostly mix of steel frames and sagging ropes. Salt air blended with exhaust from idling trucks near the grinder, and somewhere beyond the haze, instructors barked cadence as boots slammed the wet pavement in rhythm. Petty Officer 2nd Class Mara Kestrel stood slightly apart from the gathering crowd, 27 years old and built like someone who could run for miles without slowing. Her 5'6" frame looked almost fragile at a glance, but the tight, wiry muscle said otherwise. The calluses on her palms came from years of gripping rifles and climbing rope, not from weekend gym routines. Her dark hair was pulled into a regulation bun, her eyes fixed not on the foggy courtyard in front of her but somewhere beyond it, like she was seeing 2 different places at once. The fresh uniform she wore hadn't been tailored yet, sleeves hanging a little long over wrists marked with old scars and newer ink. When she moved, the coordinates tattooed on her forearm ghosted through the fabric. Numbers, meaningless to anyone who hadn't operated near Port Sarin Base in Eritrea between 2017 and 2019. She brushed a thumb over the spot out of habit before letting her hand fall again. The candidates huddled in loose groups, sizing each other up with that restless tension people get before they're pushed to their limits. Most were men in their early 20s, fresh out of initial training and ready to prove something. A few women were scattered among them, every one of them carrying that quiet steel that comes from knowing eyes would be on them twice as often. Senior Chief Rowan Hale cut through the formation with the slow, deliberate confidence of someone who'd spent half his life turning rookies into operators. 48 years old, all muscle and grit. He'd run advanced tactical programs for over a decade. His gaze lingered on Mara just a heartbeat too long before he moved on, something unreadable flickering across his expression. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your location in the comments. And if this story hits home, hit subscribe, because Major Tom's Tales is just getting started. 3 rows up stood Logan Bryce, 24, built like a college linebacker who treated the weight room like a religion. He'd already sorted everyone into categories, who mattered and who didn't, and the quiet petty officer with the loose sleeves and faraway stare wasn't even in his peripheral vision. But the way she held perfectly still, like she could stand there for hours without shifting, caught the attention of a few of the older candidates. Hale noticed it too. He'd seen that kind of controlled stillness in operators who learned the hard way that moving at the wrong moment could get you killed. The coordinates inked on her arm read 11.58 43 the location of Port Sarin Base in Eritrea, where Mara had carried out missions so compartmented that even most admirals couldn't access the full files without jumping through layers of authorization. Mara learned to shoot when she was 9, out in the thick forests outside Redhaven, Oregon, where her father, Marko Vranich, taught her that survival was something you built choice by choice. Marco had once been a Croatian military instructor before moving to the U.S. in 1996, the kind of man who measured life in meters, wind shifts, and the consequences of every decision. He never spoke directly about the Balkans, but he taught her to read terrain like other people read books. Hillsides, tree lines, every detail telling a story if you knew how to pay attention. When she was 12, he took her hunting in cold so sharp her fingers went numb around the rifle. They tracked a deer for 6 hours before she finally got a shot at it. 200 meters out, slight crosswind, the animal standing still in the clearing. She rushed the trigger, tugged instead of squeezing, and missed clean. Marco didn't scold her. He simply turned and started the long walk back to the truck. She followed in silence for 3 hours through thickening snow until they reached the cab, where he finally said, "If you rush when nothing's at stake, you'll die when it is. You take the shot only when you know you can make it." She never rushed again. A Navy recruiter showed up at her high school in Red Haven when she was 17, the year after her father died from the kind of lung damage so many Balkan veterans carried home. She enlisted 6 months after graduating, not out of some dramatic desire to honor him, but because she understood what he'd been trying to teach her. You either turned yourself into someone useful, or you became dead weight. She pushed through Bud S at 22 in 2019, one of the early women to finish the pipeline. During Hell Week, the instructors tried to break her like everyone else. No sleep, freezing water, constant punishment. But Mara had learned something in those woods with her father that most people never figure out. Pain is just data. You acknowledge it, catalog it, and keep moving. Her real education came later in the places that never showed up in her official service record. First, Port Saran Base in Eritrea, then deeper into East Africa as part of a small task unit running direct action missions against Al-Shabaab logistics networks. One target was a coordinator who'd been moving IED components responsible for killing 2 Marine EOD techs and a Navy corpsman. It was supposed to be a simple 4-person snatch and grab, but the intel had been off. The compound had twice the security they expected. Mara had overwatch duty from a rooftop 300 meters out. When the assault team got pinned, she dropped 3 threats in 40 seconds, clearing a path so the team could finish the job with 0 friendly casualties. The report called it exceptional marksmanship under stress. Sam Alder, the team leader, said it was the steadiest shooting he'd seen in 15 years. 8 months later, he was killed when his vehicle hit an IED outside Kavaro City, and Mara put in a request to move to training command the day after his memorial. The Navy approved it quickly after the usual psych evals and a 60-day reset, understanding what operators sometimes needed. She'd made Sam a promise before they closed his casket. She'd pass on what he taught her about doing the job right, even when nobody was watching. Meanwhile, Logan Bryce came from 3 generations of Navy men who all made chief before retiring, and he wore that lineage like armor. At 6'2" and 220, he'd been the star of his candidate group for 12 straight weeks, the one everyone watched and the instructors nodded at. Logan Bryce was exactly the type of candidate the Navy liked to showcase. Naturally dominant, comfortable taking charge, full of confidence, and absolutely certain his read on any situation was the right one. He sized up Mara Kestrel in about 5 seconds that first morning. Small, quiet, no obvious bulk or gym-built muscle. In his mind, she was probably there because of some integration push more focused on optics than producing real operators. He'd seen that pattern before. People who came in trying to prove something, washed out by week 3, then blamed everything except their own limits. What he didn't know, what no one knew, was that Senior Chief Rowan Hale had received a secure message 2 days earlier from NSW Group 1's Administrative Command. instructing him to observe a particular petty officer entering the advanced tactics course. Not to cut her breaks, not to offer special treatment, just to document her performance for a potential instructor pipeline review. Hale had asked why. The reply came back tightly worded. Some personnel files required additional context before assigning them correctly. The first real test arrived during advanced marksmanship drills. The candidates ran a stress shoot course. 75 meters, multiple firing positions, barricade transitions, and steel targets requiring quick engagement within narrow time windows. To pass, they needed 12 out of 15 hits in under 90 seconds. Logan went first, landing 13 in 82 seconds. Solid, controlled, nothing sloppy. The rest of the group followed with mixed results. When Mara stepped up, Logan muttered just loud enough for the nearby candidates to hear something about how small shooters always struggled with fast transitions. Mara slid into her opening position with a smoothness that hinted at thousands of unseen repetitions. She dropped all 15 targets in 68 seconds, every steel plate ringing crisp and clean. No wasted motion, no hesitation. Just quiet precision built from breath control, muscle memory, and perfect timing. The range fell silent. Chief Hale scribbled her score without a word and moved on, but something in his assessment had already shifted. Logan didn't let it break his confidence. After all, anyone could look good on a sterile range. The real separating line appeared when things got messy, when thinking, moving, and communicating had to happen at the same time. That's when pretenders cracked. Over the next week, he made it a personal mission to expose what he thought was her weak spot. He teamed up with Evan Mercer and Cole Haddon, both competent enough to be competitive, but insecure enough to feed off Logan's validation. They started with petty sabotage, taking the training materials Mara organized, forcing her to waste time searching, making sure she always ended up last in line for gear, sticking her with equipment everyone else had already picked through. Hale noticed. Under normal circumstances, he'd have shut that behavior down with corrective action that none of them would forget. But his orders had been explicit. Watch and record. Sometimes you learned more by seeing how people tolerated unfairness than by preventing it. Mara absorbed each slight without a single complaint, never asked for help, never retaliated. She just kept showing up and performing, steady and unbothered. Logan mistook that calm for agreement with his opinion. So, he escalated. During a night land-nav exercise, he intentionally gave her the wrong grid coordinates during the team brief, expecting she'd get lost, call for extraction, or time out and embarrass herself. Mara finished with the second fastest time overall, navigating by terrain features and pace count alone. When she realized the coordinates were wrong, that's when Logan's confidence finally wobbled. That's when he started wondering what exactly he was dealing with. That night, long after the other candidates had passed out, Mara sat alone in her temporary quarters. Her body ached with the familiar burn of exhaustion, but it was the kind she could easily box away. She'd lived through far worse. She pulled out a photograph she kept tucked inside her wallet, Sam Alder, captured during a rare, light-hearted moment at Port Sarin Base, smiling with the unfakeable confidence of someone who was genuinely good at a brutally difficult job. Sam Alder had been 36 when he died, seasoned for an operator, but stubborn enough to turn down every administrative slot they tried to push on him. He never wanted a desk. He wanted to keep doing the work that mattered. One night, during a long overwatch shift from a safe house outside Cavaro City, he told Mara that the hardest part of the job wasn't the danger or the non-stop missions. It was coming home and trying to uphold real standards while people who'd never been downrange made decisions for those who had. People who believed a few completed courses made them wise, even though they'd never felt the weight of guarding teammates in hostile terrain where a single mistake meant funerals, not paperwork. When she asked him how he handled that disconnect, Sam told her, "You pass on what you've learned, so the next wave makes fewer mistakes. Fewer mistakes mean fewer bodies." That memory hit harder than anything Logan Bryce had thrown at her all week. Sam was gone now, and she'd spent 2 years stuck in training roles that never required genuine mentorship. Coming here had been her attempt to honor that promise, to teach, to make sure the people behind her understood what real operational pressure looked like. Instead, she found herself stuck dealing with a candidate who measured capability by size and swagger. It would have been infuriating if it weren't so predictable. She could walk into Chief Hale's office right now, lay out her background, and get the whole problem shut down with one command-level conversation. But that wasn't the lesson. The point was proving she could take the disrespect, rise above it, and still outperform everyone there. Because the moment she needed protection to validate her place, she'd lose the credibility that came from being undeniably, objectively better. Her father had drilled that into her. Sam had reinforced it. And tomorrow, when Logan's ego inevitably pushed him to escalate again, she'd prove it once more. She brushed her fingertips over the coordinates tattooed on her arm. Port Sarin, the place that taught her how valuable it could be to let people underestimate you. The breaking point hit during the advanced close-quarters battle assessment, a high-stress shoot-house run built to test judgment under pressure. Teams of 4 had to clear a maze of rooms filled with simunition-armed role-players, acting as both threats and civilians. Every movement had consequences. Every decision split the line between mission success and accidental friendly fire. Senior Chief Hale read out the team assignments in a way that made it clear none of it was random. Logan would take element lead. Evan Mercer and Cole Haddon would run assault positions. Mara would handle rear security and support. Logan's expression said everything. He cornered Hale afterward, insisting that placing someone with unknown performance variables on his team would compromise the entire scenario. Hale listened with the patience of someone who'd heard every excuse ever invented, then shut him down. If Logan couldn't integrate different strengths into a team, he wasn't fit to lead anything. The scenario opened simple enough. 2 rooms, clean angles, obvious threats. Logan blasted through fast and loud, calling shots with the kind of overconfident aggression that looked impressive in training but would get people killed in real combat. Mara followed smoothly, covering gaps he left open, maintaining spacing, and compensating for his tunnel vision without calling him out. By room 3, the difficulty spiked, a hostage setup, multiple armed foes, and a countdown trigger that activated the moment the team stepped inside. Logan froze for half a beat, trying to sort the variables. Mara had already moved, sliding around him to set up a support angle with clean visibility on the threats without blocking his firing lane. Mara summed up the entire situation in 3 clipped words. Hostage left, threat right. Logan fired and got a clean hit. By the time they reached room 5, the scenario had escalated into something far more punishing. Multiple levels, mixed threat queues, dim lighting, and even a simulated unexploded ordnance marker that required a tactical bypass. Logan's confidence was starting to unravel. He'd trained for CQB, sure, but training usually followed predictable rhythms, and this setup was intentionally breaking those patterns in ways that exposed every weakness. Evan Mercer misread a doorway and nearly shot a non-combatant. Cole Haddon lost his sector during a transition, leaving a dangerous blind spot in their coverage. Logan called a movement that would have exposed the whole team to elevated enfilade fire, and each time, Mara quietly stepped in. Without overriding Logan's role, without humiliating him, just sliding into positions that patched their mistakes. clearing the angles they forgot, spotting threats they didn't notice, moving with the kind of calm, sharp efficiency that made a brutally complicated environment look almost easy, even though she was effectively running the scenario for 4 people while compensating for mistakes that should have gotten them killed. The final room was engineered to break teams. 6 role players, 3 civilians, 3 hostiles, overlapping fire lanes, terrible angles, and a countdown timer that left no room for error. Logan pushed in way too aggressively, locked onto the most obvious threat, and lost track of Evan's position entirely. Cole stayed glued to his own sector and didn't see a non-combatant step out of cover right into his line of fire. They were seconds from a catastrophic fail. Mara moved. She cleared her assigned sector instantly, picked up 2 hostiles Logan never even saw, put controlled pairs into both, and called out the civilian before Cole could shoot him. Then she slid into Logan's blind spot and covered the 6th role player he'd completely lost. It all happened in 6 seconds. When the simulation ended, every hostile was down, every civilian untouched, and Logan stood in the center of the room, struggling to make sense of how his team had passed a scenario that his leadership almost threw into disaster. Senior Chief Rowan Hale had watched the whole run from the control booth. He'd seen excellent shooters before. He'd seen people who performed well under controlled conditions, but what he'd just witnessed was different. Mara wasn't merely competent. She moved with the kind of seasoned awareness and judgment you only get from doing this in places where mistakes produce body bags, not remedial training. He placed a secure call to Hnaif Group 1 Administrative Command. The conversation was short. Hale asked a single question. What exactly was in her restricted file? The answer told him everything he needed to know about why he'd been assigned to observe her so carefully. Walking down to the debrief room, he already understood what was coming, and he knew Logan's professional awakening was about to get very uncomfortable. The debrief room was cramped and intentionally bare. 4 chairs, a metal table, and a screen for replaying footage. Logan sat rigid, already defensive. Evan and Cole flanked him, avoiding eye contact with Mara, who sat apart from them with the same calm, motionless presence she'd carried since day 1. Chief Rowan Hale started the playback without saying a word. The room stayed dead quiet as the entire run unfolded on screen, every mistake captured in brutal detail from multiple camera angles. Logan's tunnel vision, Evan's botched target ID, Cole abandoning his sector, and threaded through all of it the steady competence that kept the scenario from collapsing. Mara's movements, her calls, her shots. When the footage ended, Logan opened his mouth to offer something about integration issues and coordination challenges, but Hale shut him down with a simple hand gesture that made it clear he was done hearing excuses. Then the senior chief slid a folder onto the table. Not a training packet, but a personnel file, or at least the unclassified slice of one. He told them they were about to learn a lesson about assumptions, about deciding who belonged and who didn't based on appearances instead of proof, about the difference between loud confidence and actual capability. He opened the folder. Petty Officer 2nd Class Mara Kestrel. Special Warfare Operator Rating. Bud S. Class 347 Graduate. Multiple operational deployments to East Africa from 2017 to 2019 as part of a specialized task unit running direct action missions. Designated marksman with verified combat engagements. Current status, under evaluation for advanced instructor qualification. Logan's face drained of color. Evan looked like he might be sick. Cole stared at the file, silently processing the fact that they'd spent 2 weeks trying to undermine someone who had worked in real combat zones where armed hostiles had tried and failed to break her. Hale continued. He explained that Mara wasn't here as a student at all. She'd been inserted into the course as a potential instructor, and the real evaluation was how she handled maintaining professional standards while dealing with the exact kind of unprofessional behavior they'd been demonstrating. He told them her flawless shoothouse performance wasn't luck or good range skills. It was the product of operational experience being applied to a training scenario. And those coordinates tattooed on her arm? They marked Port Seren Base in Eritara, where she'd run multiple direct action missions with a SEAL task unit. Silence collapsed over the room. Hale let it sit, letting each of them stew in the weight of their ignorance before turning directly to Logan. He told him leadership wasn't about being physically imposing or the loudest voice in the room. It was about recognizing strength in others and using it to make the team stronger. Logan had failed that test completely, and worse, he'd created a toxic environment aimed at someone who could have taught them more in 2 weeks than they'd learn in half a year. Mara sat through all of it without a flicker of expression. She'd known this moment would come sooner or later. A part of her had hoped Logan would figure out his mistake on his own, just by watching. But ego is powerful, and some lessons only land when they come wrapped in discomfort. Chief Rowan Hale dismissed Evan and Cole, telling them to think long and hard about the kind of teammates they intended to become. Once they stepped out, he turned to Logan Bryce and asked a single, pointed question. What happens now? Logan finally looked at Mara Kestrel, really looked at her, for the first time since the debrief began, seeing not a quota check or a weak link, but someone who'd operated for real and lived through things he couldn't even picture. He told her he'd been wrong. No excuses, no defensiveness, just an honest admission that he'd failed to recognize what was right in front of him. Mara gave him a single nod. She told him that being wrong wasn't the issue. Everybody gets things wrong. The real danger was letting ego keep you from learning. If he could get past that, he might eventually become the leader he imagined himself to be. Outside, the sun was finally burning through the morning fog, revealing the obstacle course: steel, rope, and all the challenges waiting beyond this one. 5 days later, the formal paperwork came through. Logan received counseling for his behavior and was removed from leadership consideration until he showed real improvement in judgment and teamwork. Evan and Cole received similar notes in their files. Each of them was given the choice to remain in the program or transfer out. All 3 stayed. Mara's own status shifted from student to provisional instructor assistant, a role that allowed her to help teach while progressing through the instructor qualification pipeline. Chief Hale explained that NS Dawes Group 1 had plans for her skill set, specifically building curriculum that translated advanced tactical decision-making into usable guidance for conventional units who needed those skills but would never go through full special operations training. The weight of Sam Alder's memory felt a little lighter after that. She still carried his photo, still thought about Cavaro City and Port Seren, and the missions locked away in classified files she'd never be able to talk about. But now she had a path that honored what he'd tried to teach her. Service meant more than what you accomplished personally. It meant what you passed on. 3 weeks later, during a land navigation drill, Logan approached her. Not with ego, not with attitude, but with a genuine question about terrain association in low visibility conditions. She spent 15 minutes walking him through the same techniques Marco Vranich taught her back in the forests outside Redhaven. Those were the same lessons that kept Mara sharp whenever technology failed, and the only things she could trust were her eyes, her instincts, and solid judgment. Before long, other candidates began drifting toward her with their own questions, not in a way that stepped on the primary instructor's authority, but because they recognized she understood the operational side of things in a way the classroom couldn't replicate. She answered them carefully, trimming out anything classified, explaining what it meant to operate in places where the rules were different, and the consequences of mistakes were permanent, not just paperwork. Senior Chief Rowan Hale watched that shift with quiet satisfaction. He'd been right to let everything unfold naturally. Some lessons weren't teachable through lectures. They had to be lived. 4 months after she'd arrived, on a clear morning where the fog burned off early, Mara stood on the grinder watching a brand new candidate class begin day 1. Behind her, instructors were already sizing up the fresh faces, gauging who might make it and who would fold. She brushed her fingers over the coordinates on her arm one more time before letting her hand fall. Port Sarin was 8,000 miles away, but the lessons she learned there lived here now, being passed on to people who would eventually carry them into their own missions. Sam Alder would have approved. The cycle kept turning, and this time she was part of making sure it ran the right way, with respect earned through ability and leadership shaped by humility instead of ego. And the work continued.